Okay, and there is our opening light bulb. Clickety, clickety, click, clack, 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 that Peter came up with. That one of these days I will have advanced to the stage where I can actually have more sophisticated and sound effects and all that, but I'm too rudimentary. And there is the website, tortucanwordpress.com, which we will be talking about again. If you don't have this on your speed dial, on your iPhone, I've got it on mine. My Android or your PC or whatever, why not? It doesn't do diddly squat good what I'm doing if you're not sharing the stuff and telling everybody about it. So there's my stop sharing thing, and I can shut that down and gradually remove my menu so that I bandwidth. And hello, everybody. I see Beige in the window. We have some guests here. As usual, we have Cap, and we can boot him at any moment. And then we've also got Croco Squirrel. And both of you guys, please keep an eye on what's going on in the live chat in case I miss it, in case somebody brings up a question or comment or whatever that I may miss, so that we can react to that directly and call attention to all stuff.
Stand by, working on it now.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think I've got all my thing down. If anybody is hearing any roboting or anything, let me know. I've shut down Twitter, which I think was the problem a couple of weeks ago where that was happening. And that can be a difficulty. I'm a rudimentary little schmuck here. I'm an old fart who didn't have that when I was growing up, all this internet and YouTubes and cameras on your home computer. People didn't do that when I was a kid, and even as an adult.
Thing as a home computer when you and I were born.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when my brother brought home his brand new Texas Instrument computer with 48K memory. Wow.
Wow. I still got
I see a new face in here. We have a creator of dreams. And
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, creator of dreams. Hello. Depends on what dreams you create and which ones not. I see Old Scratch and BJ and all the rest, a lot of them. Anyway, the main theme that I've been doing is the Contested Bones book by Rupe and Sanford, who are young Earth creationists. Sanford is known for his genetic entropy argument, which is twaddle, and it's fun to explore as well.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you've got hi Animal Man, but the main guy that did the air quotes research on this thing was Christopher Rupe, and he's the guy mainly responsible for all the mess that I've been looking through. I noticed right off the bat, I was asked to analyze the book by a viewer who said they didn't want to take the trouble to do it, and I'm an anal retentive old fart geek, so I'm perfectly happy to, and he sent me the book free. For me to make use of it because I can't afford to buy a lot of stuff. So that was very useful. And one thing I noticed right off the bat, here's a little primer. I mentioned it earlier, but it's always good to remember when you see a book like this, before you start even reading it, you want to look at the structure of the book. So you can take a look, obviously, at the table of contents, which is finding that. That's an obvious thing. But more importantly, go right to the bloody back of the book and start looking at the rear to see, does it have an index? Oh, gosh, no. Does it have a reference bibliography? Oh, gosh, no. Does it have conventional referencing? Okay, finally, yeah, there's footnotes. So that means I have to go through. How do you find out what they mention? You go look in the index. How do you know what they've referenced? You have to look point by point by point. So what I've been doing is creating a master bibliography for the book, going through source by source, and then also a spreadsheet analyzing the nature of that material. And at the moment, they've got a couple hundred sources that they've cited, which is only about 2 per page, which is pretty low. And over half of it is secondary sources. Of the not quite half technical literature that they've cited so far, which is only about 47%, about a third of that is directly inaccurate in that they are misrepresenting the source. They're quoting stuff that doesn't in it. They're ignoring contrary information in it. They're selectively authority quoting it. That's direct problem. The remainder of their stuff is either just authority quoting that's true. It accurately reflects the source material, but it may or may not be relevant because it's dated, but that's not a direct misrepresentation of the source itself, or it's non-controversial, the equivalent of saying that here they document that there's a bone there. Well, nobody's arguing that. So, yeah, but to have a rate of a third wrong, 37% at the moment of direct misrepresentation of sources. It shouldn't be any misrepresentation of sources. Any misrepresentation is a problem. But when you're at that high of a level, you're at head up your ass level. Comments, please?
Yeah, I was gonna say Animal Man in the chat said it's almost as if they intentionally did that to make sure their quote minds aren't accurate.
Ooh, we're going to see that very thing. Thank you for that convenient bit, because the example I'm going to be showing you today is exactly like that.
We have at least possibly one creationist in the chat too.
Oh,
yep,
who's that?
A guy named Hamden Hamdi.
Oh, Hamden Hamdi. Okay, hi Hamden.
Also,
what is your main
forgot about it.
Yeah.
He can go ahead and say what his view is, and keep an eye on what he has to say, as well as figuring out whether he can turn his cap locks off. Apparently, he can't fix his cap locks. Oh dear, that's showing a problem. Even I can fix my caps locks. You press the caps lock button. So
possible this caps lock button lost a spring under it.
That's possible. There could be demons. Perhaps his keyboard is infested by
hypodemon
extraterrestrials.
I was thinking when you were reading that, like, they don't have a bibliography, they don't have any source citation reference, they just have the little footnotes. I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be taking classes where I'm going to have to write a bunch of papers. I know I'm going to be doing history, geography, and English. So I'm going to be writing papers for that. If I don't have a site, if I don't cite one source and I fail to cite a source, everything must be cited. So basically, I'm going to have a higher rigorous standard writing a paper for a college class than professional creationists do for their own work.
Exactly.
That's pretty sad. That's sad.
Hey, Cap, before you run me over again, because you have a habit of doing that, be aware that your average creationist wouldn't know what research was if it bit them on the backside.
Let me disagree with you a bit on that. There are gradations.
Not the type of research that most of us would consider.
There are gradations here. There are what I call detail fiddlers. These are the ones who actually cite technical literature. They're just chock-a-block with it. They're playing gotcha games with it a lot. That's true. But there are some people who have a meticulous mind in this respect. Andrew Snelling falls into that category. Todd Wood,
Andrew Snelling is an actual scientist.
They fall into that category. But you can start seeing the details of where they're starting to fall by the wayside once you start examining the primary source directly, which is that it is a bad dog right off the bat to make a controversial assertion without documentation. You can say anything you like, fine and dandy, but offer sources for it. If you're claiming that elephants are a form of asparagus, you jolly well better have stuff on elephants and asparagus to justify this.
Yeah, how does that work again, RJ? Oh, yeah, that's right. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah.
You don't have
and the other thing is what is sufficient evidence? That if you want to argue, as Rupe and Sanford do, that Australopithecines are just weird chimpanzees, fine and dandy, make that argument, but they need to lay out the criteria for accepting or rejecting that argument. What exactly would an Australopithecine need to have to disqualify it as just a chimpanzee form? This is
you know what it would have to have? It would have to have solid. It would have to have a solid, straightforward hand articulation, as in no gap in the middle of it, so that the damn things could knuckle walk, which they could not.
Yeah, and I got into C. Brown, who is the creationist that appeared briefly on our show a couple weeks ago, and proved to be very typical for a certain breed of lower echelon creationist. He was just making in the side chats on the show since then, he was just beating that dead horse on whether or not Australopithecines were knuckle walkers. He repeatedly cited a paper that he gleaned from Rupe and Sanford that happened to mention that one of the wrist bones in the Australopithecines appears to have the features that would be consistent with ancestors that were knuckle walkers. At no point were they ever claiming that Australopithecines were knuckle walkers or that anyone has that bit, and yet he just couldn't get past that little blip of information to the point that the content of the article itself didn't support the point he was making. And you just can't get past that Tortugan mind shell. Anyway, here we are keeping an eye on stuff. We have another freaking atheist. Hi. And some people may be knocking.
Apparently he has a name similar to that of someone else around here.
Yeah. Oh yes. In fact, yes. I was going to send him a link to the thing if he wants, and somebody has access to it, they can bring him in on the Hangout if he wants to join in, because I've got my Twitter shut down, so I don't have the bit on that. So does anyone spot where this Hamden Hamdi, what his views are?
No, he hasn't said anything else.
Okay.
No, but who would you want to try? AFA?
Yeah. If he wants to join in, send him a message on there.
Yeah,
and
I'll send him a message.
And bring him on in. I'd be happy to have him. He's welcome absolutely anytime. Anyway, let me get myself set up here for our next installment, which is the Head Up the Assism. I put a link in the paper, in the video description, to an old 1988 paper by Boaz that's really very good. I mean, given the fact that it's 30 years old and there's been a lot of water under the bridge since then, it's still a meticulous analysis of the issues. And all Rupe was citing it for was an allusion to the fact that they had done a radiometric dating of the Laetoli prints. And the various, not the prints themselves, but the deposits that they were sandwiched in between. And that was all. Well, you can read for yourself how detailed that analysis is. And they actually went out of their way to explain, he went out of his way to describe why Australopithecines were bipedal, some of the issues about whether they were arboreal or not, ones that we've still seen popping up in the literature over the 30 years since. So it's an extremely informative primer piece that'll not only get you into the state of the art in the 1980s, but also show you how much information the creationists had to step around even in the 1980s, let alone what stuff has come along since. So that one I think was a fun one. But where Rupe then jumped off the gangplank was in what he did next, which he was then trying to assail the potassium-argon dating system. And he brought up a link to a recent New Mexico geochronology lab summary piece. And that one is what I put the link up to. Let me get my little... Old RJ has trouble bringing up his damn menus as usual. Let me get to screen share. There we go. And let's put this up here. And we can go over there and that up there. Okay, so hopefully everybody is seeing blue and the Knowledge Lab. Now, this paragraph is the one, the first one on the screen, is the one they excerpt a little bit of. And what they quoted was, because the potassium-argon dating technique relies on the determining the absolute abundances of both so forth and so on, there's no reliable way to determine if the assumptions are valid. Argon loss and excess argon and two carbon problems that may cause erroneous ages to be determined, ... At this ... point, that excised this part next, then they picked up the sentence down here, excess argon can cause the calculated age to be older than the true age of the dated material, and they stopped. What they left out was the middle. Argon loss occurs when radiogenic 40 argon asterisk produced within a rock mineral escapes sometime after its formation. Alteration in high temperature can damage a rock mineral, and this can cause the calculated age to be younger than the true age of the dated material. So it can be both, depending on whether or not it's coming in or out. By removing that sentence, that is a way beyond just authority quoting, or it's possible he may have glommed on, but he deliberately linked to this very site. He wasn't citing it from somebody else. He wasn't commenting it on somewhere else. He was a direct linkage to this. The removal of this sentence is bad dog in the scholarly.
Oh boy, man, that is like quote mining at its finest, and it's just like link you to the exact website. It's like they have no respect for the intellectual honesty or intelligence of their audience.
I know, right?
And it gets worse because of the two paragraphs below. That was the section immediately after this. that he made no mention to, which is the 40 argon, 39 argon dating tech is a more sophisticated variation of the potassium argon technique. And it doesn't require you to know how much potassium there is. It doesn't require you to know the original components. It bypasses the normal technique. And as I looked into a little bit later on about that, it was an ingenious system, because what they do is they don't measure the potassium directly. They bombard the potassium and turn 39 into potassium into argon. And because of the particular balance as to 36 argon, which is known from atmospheric things, they can measure those proportions, and that gives you a relative dating thing independent of this argon leakage problem. And then if you use multiple techniques and isochrons and all that stuff, you can get even more accurate stuff. So I'll stop sharing this for the moment and call attention to the fact that in no shape whatsoever can Rupe and Sanford be thought of as fairly representing the content of that piece they linked to. They were deliberately bypassing relevant information. We'll attribute it all to Rupe. Now, Rupe, supposedly they got a chapter later on that I haven't gone through in detail yet, which is assailing radiometric dating on these Australopithecines and other dating things. And I'll look through to see, I've done a quick scan through. It looks like there's an awful lot of old stuff in there. So I'll see whether or not whether they actually address this issue or not in that section. And by the way, I'm keeping a tab on that because of the radiometric chapter that I'm doing in the new book with Jackson Wheat, that I'm going to want to call attention to these issues about these little fast and loose games with potassium argon and all of that. So any comments? I know you, I think, know a lot about radiometric dating, Crocker Squirrel.
Yep.
Would you like to expound?
I would indeed like to expound. I would like to expound in a rather large manner, but we'd need 3 shows to do that properly. So here's the deal.
Frustrated Atheist is here. Sorry to jump on you. We'll get to Frustrated Atheist in a bit. Continue, Croc.
So here's the thing. And you can jump up and down and scream and yell and do whatever you like in these regards. But ultimately, you have to deal with we have very clear indications of the half-lives of every element that does have its own radioactive isotopes, starting with carbon, and working our way all the way up to uranium, which, if I remember correctly, has a couple of billion years.
Yeah.
To even lose for a half-life. So most of the uranium that we have at this, most of the lead that we have at this point, most of the stable lead was at one point uranium.
Yeah. And so that some of these byproducts are so specific that the very existence of them, independent of the calibration tools and the other stuff, their very existence screams that they've been decaying for a really long time.
Or that they have been decayed from something. For example, You're not going to get carbon-14. You won't see carbon-14 in a substance more than 50,000 or so years old. But you might find an assload of, I don't know, say nitrogen-14.
Yeah, and some of the things, because there are decay chains that in a way form like phylogenies of decay, so that you can give an expectation about what kinds of little decay chains you're going to be expecting and what kind of little features in there. One of the things that entered into that polonium halo issue was the fact that radon, which is one of the decay products in that uranium series, is a gas that can leak around, and it's produced all sorts of mess with these little polonium halos that Robert Gentry was tossing out back in the 1960s, I think, published in Science magazine. I mean,
because polonium itself has a decay rate of pretty much zilch. It's slow. It's slow enough to be detectable, but not particularly well measurable. I forget exactly what its half-life is. These polonium halos aren't actually polonium.
Yeah, Old Scratch says he bought some uranium from Amazon. Are you going for that gigawatt? Your flux capacitor?
Bet he is.
Well, okay. Hello to our newcomer, our muscle flexing frustrated.
Hello.
Say
What's
hi.
going on, guys?
Oh,
Lots of this and a bunch of that. We're having a go at some people over the idea that carbon dating is the be all end all of everything that might even remotely be considered radiometric dating.
And I will actually, I think. Oh, sorry, Frustrated. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's most likely because everything that can be carbon dated is everything that can actually confirm a 10,000-year Earth.
yeah, in principle, you would have thought that.
Yeah.
We could really be able to well, for one thing, we'd have to wonder why there aren't more really well-preserved fossils available if everything was occurring in a flood only 4,500 years ago. We would expect to see things that would be preserved as well as Ötzi the Iceman. We'd expect to see dinosaurs and other critters that occasionally, not always, but occasionally were preserved in such incredible detail that they've got their whole carcass available, and any radiocarbon in there would be dateable. So it would all pop up exactly the same age. Well, that's not what we find. Boy, is it not what we find.
We find lots of stuff all over everywhere, and no idea how it all came to pass in just exactly this way that would make any sense on an Earth that wasn't at least 3 billion years old. And we can even do gas chromatography on very tiny crystals to suggest when they formed or when they were last melted. It's something in the neighborhood of 4.0 ago. The last time some of those crystals had been melted, there was actually a paper on it about 3 years ago.
Well, that's true. That's another handy thing about isochrons, which I'll be going into in the new book with Jackson Wheat, because that's an area that's just mangled by creationists. They gotta parse through that. And one of the things that isochron dating is so handy about is it can detect when the rock has undergone metamorphosis, because you won't get an isochron that way. So you can, or if it's been melted and reformed in a nice manageable manner, the line will be reset up higher than you would expect otherwise. And the angle of the line determines how old it is. So the steeper the gradient, the older the thing is. So isochrons are a really fabulous little tool, and they have to leave most of the information out on that little puppy.
And I was going to say one thing on the carbon dating about why I think most people say that and use it is because carbon dating, unless if you take like an actual like high school chemistry class or you have a teacher who knows a little bit on it, carbon dating seems to be like a catch-all term that people use for all radiometric dating.
Yeah.
And so radiometric dating and carbon dating.
You lie like a freaking rug. All of my teachers were very specific in that it was not carbon dating, it was radiometric dating.
Yeah,
in fact, there was a young man who not only insisted it was all carbon dating, he failed 3 tests and the course by insisting on this.
This is more common in grassroots anti-evolutionists.
I was going to say, Squirrel, I know when I was in school, I only had one teacher who went into clarification on that, and that was my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Krubel. Because I asked her, like, well, how do we know that the dinosaurs went out, 65 million years ago and that? And, just curious on how do we know this? No one was around then. And she went in and talked about some of the different dating methods and how it worked. And every other teacher I had besides her usually referred to it as carbon dating. So it was, I think that is a big problem on that as to why.
Yeah, you occasionally you'll get teachers at the
you're kind of cutting
public
it now.
School level who aren't necessarily well versed in their disciplines. They're just teaching from the text.
Yeah,
and it's like the number of history teachers that when I was growing up, they were ex-coaches. And so they were not necessarily the best versed on the history. And it was quite a delight when I finally got into a level in high school where I was bumping into some history teachers who actually knew history.
Yeah, that's.
Here's the entertaining thing. Here's the problem. All of my teachers knew the difference. The one that didn't was found out and was fired almost immediately, despite the fact that she'd been doing there teaching it wrong for over 20 years.
Yeah.
Now, what that suggests to me is that you didn't have one good teacher; you had a shitload of bad ones that were not vetted properly. That doesn't say as much about the teacher that you were talking about as it does all the other ones.
Yeah, it varies
Yeah.
from one district to another. It depends on how active the local population is in kind of keeping tabs upon their districts. We have the United States is unusual in being a completely decentralized educational system. Although we have a Department of Education, for all practical purposes, all education decisions are made at the local and state level. So standards and what books are to be used and all the rest are done at that level. They're not really governed nationally. It's not like France, where everything is from Paris and everybody in every region of France gets exactly what the Parisian central government says the curriculum is supposed to be. We don't have anything like that here in the United States.
Yeah, it's like I said, I just was lucky. I just was lucky enough to ever, as a teacher, that I was able to learn that, because I thought that was one of the coolest things ever.
As a on this illustration of educational experience, frustrated, give us a little clue as to what kind of stuff you were getting in science education when you were coming up, and what kind of time frame. For me, we're talking 1960s. We're talking way later than that for CAP, and somewhere in between, closer probably to my age, for crocus squirrel.
Well, me and Cap are both the same age.
I'm a few days older than you. Thank you very much.
A day.
A useful contrast there. What were your experiences in science education?
Well, when it came to science, I grew up. My aunt actually homeschooled us, and she had a every year.
Oh, mute, Lord Crocus Squirrel there, or I'll have to.
But every year, after the end of the school year, we'd have to go like up to Austin, Texas, and do a test to make sure where we were academically.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember much about that. And then in high school, I didn't pay attention because I was still a believer. So I thought, what was the point?
Did they have any mandatory science classes?
Mandatory science as in for what?
Oh, chemistry, physics, probably, or biology.
Yeah, I took integrated physics and chemistry, and I also took biology.
Yeah, those are the three breakdowns in our school system here, and we could take two of any of the science subjects, minimum. And I skipped the biology thing because I didn't want to dissect frogs, so I actually didn't get much biological information when I was coming up on things, and I was kind of an evolution skeptic well into the late 1970s, really, and so I had to kind of catch up. But in some ways, that was kind of an advantage because I didn't have to unlearn what material I may have gotten in the biology class back in the 1960s. Instead, I could pick up where the science was in the 1980s and get it directly.
Yeah, that does seem like it would be a pretty bigger advantage than some.
Yeah, I love the biology side. I took animal science, biology, and I wanted to take advanced biology, but they wouldn't let me take it because it was only for seniors, and at the time I was a junior, so I ended up taking physics.
So they booted Cap on that.
Yeah.
No, they gave him a load of camel crap and bus tickets.
The thing is that anybody that's coming in now theoretically has an enormous advantage. There was so much I would have had to have unlearned, or rather have caught up on the speed on, because all the homeobox genes were only discovered in the 1990s. So there's been just a colossal revolution in the dynamics of things. Paleogenomics, where they can now take all of that knowledge and start retro-engineering things and experimenting with reconstructed proteins and developmental biology sequences. That's just going to happen more and more and more and more. So that field of data is on rollers moving ahead, and creationists are going to have a devil of a time keeping up with that, because they're not really good at dealing with the science of 20 years ago, let alone the science of today.
Yeah.
We're about halfway through, so let me put up my shameless plug, and also to call attention to our wonderful gang here, who are the Patreons of the project. Let me do the clumsy screen share as usual. Look, there we go. Move that over there. Get rid of the infinite regress. There's RJ's patrons, Stephen and Marigale and Dyer and Andrew and Eat and Yui and Mona and Henril and Jen and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Eric and Benjamin and Staggles and Alex and Cirrus and Totas Real and Everett and Paul. Thank you all for supporting the project at Patreon. There's the patreon.com downer tip. Admittedly, they're slow as molasses on actually transferring money to me, so it's more in spirit supporting the project rather than much in reality. And so for people who really want to jump in and help directly where it gets to me as real money in like a couple days, the GoFundMe.com DC Go is the thing there. And don't forget the wordprocess.com thing, all of the various book chapters that I have up, and 3 macroevolutionary episodes, and link to my books, and I've got stuff on a lot of different subject matter, the Tortucan concept, philosophy issues. There's a lot of stuff there, and I welcome questions and comments. Everybody comes in. I answer all questions and comments there. I do that on Twitter as well, and I'm say, pick my brain. I'm here to help. So there's the stop sharing of shameless plug, and that's the matter on that. We've got another half of the show to deal with, which has to do with the person that I've been criticizing quite a while, Dinesh D'Souza, and the fancy little world of the Coulter Camp anti-evolutionist knocking around in there. For those who've been following me, you'll know I'm no fan of Dinesh D'Souza, who is a sanctimonious jerk and propagandist. And he is a snotty, venomous troll in many respects, and that's his good side. He is a long-term propagandist. He despises liberals and Democrats and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and Obama, and he has now jumped on somewhat belatedly the Trump bandwagon. And he's been doing programs of The Big Lie, where he's arguing that the Democrats are the reasons why there were Nazis and racism and the KKK. And yeah, it's an interesting mishmash of pseudo-history. Anyway, one of the things that I keep poking at him on is the evolution and climate change issue. Dinesh is explicitly a climate change denialist. And he does this not by reading climate science, as far as I can tell, but by riffing off of people that he reads online and the Heartland Institute, Flax, and all of that. So I've already done some videos examining that side of him. And the other issue on the evolution part, Dinesh was never really an anti-evolutionist. He didn't join the Intelligent Design Brigade. He's kind of iffy and waffly on this subject, and he insists he accepts evolution. Well, what evolution? Is it macroevolution? Is it hominid origins for humans? Can you be clearer on this? He isn't clearer on this, but it is a way for him to avoid that third rail, which is to deal with the support base that's around him. At one point, he was going to go down to a church gathering mass of people who were from one of the guys that was in the Duck Dynasty show. And this is a bunch of very conservative Coulter Camp for NRA types, creationists. And I asked him whether he should ask the audience, how many out there think the Earth is 6,000 years old? And see how many would raise their hands. Needless to say, he did not do that. And so what I've been doing, he could easily block me. I mean, you got to give the guy props. He hasn't blocked me. So he's not like Ken Ham, who blocks people at the drop of a hat. But nonetheless, I keep on poking at him. And when I poke at him is I'm trying to find out more about his demographic as well as the Trumplandia demographic. It's pretty clear that the vast majority of people who are Trumpistas are creationists, many of them full-blown young Earth creationists. They're climate change skeptics. They're that demographic of anti-evolutionism that I've been studying for decades. So this is not a shock to me. But I want to observe more specifically what's going on in Dinesh's little world. And and hope keep everybody an eye on what's going on over in the side chat there, because I'm not following that closely. Anyway, just like a couple days ago, I was poking my little poke at Dinesh, and one of the people who was praising his new movie, The Death of a Nation, where he's talking about Donald Trump being the counterpart of Lincoln. Woo! Anyway, one of his supporters, we'll have to go into that in a bit. Anyway, one of his supporters decided to come in because I was asking that person, this secondary person, what were their views on evolution and climate change, so that I could measure the demographic again. And that person didn't reply, but somebody else jumped in. There's an awful lot of somebody else jumping in that goes on in the culture camp side. It doesn't happen very easily on our side, so we have a different cognitive architecture, especially on Twitter. But anyway, this person came in and immediately put in a link to a video on evolution matters. And guess who? Kent Hovind. And I put a link up to the Kent Hovind video that he linked to. It was where Hovind supposedly demolished Bill Nye in a debate in 2015. And I go, okay. But anyway, the guy then finished the indigestible creationist Sunday by then weighing in on climate change. And they put up another video. And that was to a 2017 interview with Patrick Moore, who's a Canadian climate skeptic. He had been with Greenpeace over the years, and he's still very active. And I have a little bit of him in my bibliography already because I cover the creationism matter, owing to the fact that it's the same methodology and in large measure a lot of the same demographic in terms of the cultural conservatism. But the thing was that this Moore's big deal issue is that carbon dioxide can't really be warming the climate, clearly, because there was an ice age in the Ordovician when carbon dioxide levels were like 10 times higher than they are now, and there was an ice age. And he's been playing that little piece. So I was starting to investigate this Ordovician ice age, and I didn't really know a great deal about that aspect of it, but I do now. And two of the papers I put up, which will be very relevant. The fascinating thing is it won't surprise you that Moore was leaving out data. Now, it's possible that Moore just didn't think to look, but the first order of business that jumps out is the continents are distributed differently back in the Ordovician. So you've got a bunch of stuff in the southern hemisphere, you've got a lot of ocean up in the north, you have a very different climate dynamic, so all the ocean circulation patterns that keep the climate warm or cool are different in that kind of a bit. But the other one is really interesting because of the faint sun paradox problem, which is that the sun was cooler when it started out and only relatively recently warmed up. And it was the fact that the carbon dioxide levels, which were quite 10 times, it turns out they've been reanalyzing it, they were a little under, less than 8 times what present values are. But when you put all of those together, the carbon dioxide, plants were just kicking in at this time, by the way, and they were just running amok and altering the climate. They were altering things. This is the Ordovician climate surge and bumping has to do a great deal about the spread of plants, including bryophytes, which turned out to scrub carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But the thing is that the CO2 levels that were so high during this period were compensating for the faint sun. So they were warming the climate up from the chill it would have been had it not been for all that carbon dioxide. And it turns out that the ice age part occurs when there is a drop in the carbon dioxide level, cooling the planet down in a hurry and producing that Ordovician ice age. So far from disproving the idea that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, it confirms it.
Yeah. Wait, so RJ, are you telling us that someone who denied climate change was not being honest with their data?
I know, it's shocking. Shocking, isn't it?
Well,
And so what we got is
No,
exactly the
Cap,
same.
You are wrong. That's not at all what's going on.
Exactly the thing. And one of the reasons, one of the constant drum beats that I'm doing in the TIP project is method is everything. That the methodology by which Patrick Moore is skating around the Ordovician Ice Age, the method that the creationist who thought Kent Hovind was a good idea was doing in linking to him, the methodology of Dinesh D'Souza not thinking about the demographic of the people that are supporting him and not really bothering about the fiddly bit details, the demographic of Rupe and Sanford in the creationism book that I've been analyzing. It's the same method. It's limited secondary sources, limited data field, failure to work out what you think happened, failure to pay attention to all the data, failure to define what it is would change your mind. Those are the core methodological problems that pop up in everybody who believes things that aren't true. And then the flip side.
Wasn't it Kent Hovind who thought that wasn't it Kent Hovind who thought that the whole entire reason why what is it, that the climate change was due to like cow farts?
He may have said that. That wouldn't surprise me. My favorite one.
That's not actually the Hovind theory. The Hovind theory involves
the ice. Yeah, there's a canopy of ice and water in the atmosphere that protected everything from UV rays. Not to mention.
Hey, Captain. Captain. Yeah. I speak for myself, please, sir.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. Crocker Squirrel was talking.
Hey. Another part of this was a large ice meteorite that broke up and scattered, and by means of magnetic fields, came into the planet at the poles, freezing the mammoths standing up.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. My favorite one that's not a Hovind.
What he neglects to notice is that impacts expel energy. Energy is turned from the potential and through to kinetic energy, which does its own set of damage, creates its own generalized heat. And it wouldn't matter whether the great big asteroid 5 or 10 or 100 miles across, his words, by the way, impacted in one piece or 1,000,008 pieces. The same energy would be transferred to the planet, which would, of course, result in everything dying and the planet melting clear through the core.
Let me jump in here. Clade Starfish says, any sentence starting with "didn't Kent Hovind think" isn't going to end well. I have to agree with that one, Clade.
Never does.
My favorite climate wacky theory is, I can't remember the name of the guy. It escapes me offhand. He has a weird creationist site, but his position is that the world is warming up because hell is expanding inside the earth.
What?
I'm not making this up.
Oh my God, that's great.
By the way, Mr. RJ, going back to, as much as I hate to drag us back to a previous topic, you were asking about all of our educational experiences. I can tell you for myself that there is, in fact, a federal standard that can, and in some places, is adhered to. Most notably, in the military-run civilian private schools.
Ooh, I don't know about that one. Fill us in on that. That actually is something I didn't know. Yeah, give us a little brief summary.
Schools, they actually have a stock list of books at elementary, middle, and high school levels, and everybody will be using the same books. The federal government goes through the existing textbooks on an annual basis to determine whether or not these books will be replaced, updated, or left to fallow for one more year. Textbooks in the Dodge schools rarely last longer than 5 years. Science books are almost invariably replaced every other year without fail.
And I'm hoping they use like regular, normal, correct science books.
Yes, as a matter of fact, they do. They have a list of authors with actual credentials that they will accept. Remember Ken Miller's biology book?
Mm-hmm.
I carried around 2 editions over 2 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that will be something that we will see whether or not there is any effort in Trumplandia and Davos and all the rest to alter that situation or not. Anybody that is watching the show or has connections with any of that in terms of how the Department of Defense operates currently, that if they get any scuttlebutt or information on that, be sure to let us all know so we can deal with that.
Dependent Schools has not changed its policies since I was my youngest age. They have not. It's the civilian schools here that are a problem. The ones overseas, they all follow that one. They all follow this standard, and they have an actual science team that goes through the science textbooks, just as they have a small team of people that reviews books for English and for any given foreign language, for mathematics, make sure that they're sufficiently up to date. Our government spends millions after millions after millions of dollars to make sure that the schools in Germany and that our schools in Europe and in Asia and some of these other places, they all have up-to-date textbooks.
Going all evidence-based.
And if I went from one Dodge school to another Dodge school on the other side of the planet, I could pick up my books. I'd know exactly where I was, and that would be the end of it. You would have the only differences in instruction would be the speed at which it was accomplished. So if I went from a high school in, say, Vilseck in what used to be West Germany, and I went around to the other side of the continent, was enrolled in a Dodge school in South Korea, I could pick up the textbook, ask where they were in the process, and I will know exactly how far I have to go to catch up, if I have to.
In the same way that the Defense Department is paying attention to climate change, and they were doing it even before the Obama years, because they actually have to impact that. Issues about whether or not the availability of fossil fuels for ships, whether or not you can use renewable biofuels, whether or not Hampton Roads is going to be underwater as sea levels rise and tidal surges affect all of that. All of these are issues that they can't pretend aren't there anymore because the reality is there.
That's because the people that are actually running those shows in the Department of Defense aren't politicians. They are the people that are actually doing this are appointed by the people immediately over them, and are required to have a certain level of certification and vetting by a neutral think tank that the Defense Department itself maintains.
Hey guys,
anyway, I'll put a general call out again for anybody, and I know a lot of people in the military. Yeah, jump in.
No, I think you were somehow echoing through Squirrel.
Oh, somebody's got they need to mute their microphone or their feed off of the YouTube.
I think it was.
Yeah,
I
always make a point of doing that myself, because that has happened where I have occasionally left my monitor feed on as well, and I start getting this echoing effect, and that's very annoying.
I guarantee you it is not me.
No, it sounded like, because when RJ was talking, it was echoing the Hangout, and you were popping up, Squirrel. So it might have just somehow echoed through your Hangout. I don't know.
Animal Man has a point in there. As far as I know, most biology books talking about Archaeopteryx still portrayed as half reptile, half bird. It was portrayed as when it was discovered instead of the more bird-like one it was. Well, it is a half dino, half bird. Some of the Archaeopteryxes were actually misidentified as dinosaurs, the one that had extremely faint feather things. I went into all of this in 3 macroevolutionary episodes and Dinomania. There's a whole bunch on that. See, I got stuff in there. And the information hasn't changed notably since. It's still... the area in the early origin of birds, which would be about 140 million years ago, Archaeopteryx dates to about 150 million years ago. Something interesting is happening then, and we have very little data on it. And it's partly because of... Yeah.
Mr. Stevens in the side in the live chat suggests that you're starting to sound like RoboCop.
Oh, well, that's nothing that I'm doing from my end, because I don't have anything else on. I don't have anything other... It must be their feed or something happening at the YouTube end. I apologize if so, because I don't have any other files and stuff open that would be acting as memory hogs.
Well, I hate to get off, but I actually do have to go.
Okay, thank you for frustrated and your experience on the education thing. I'm glad you could bring that up.
Yeah, not a problem. And I will come back whenever you want me back.
Yeah, the on Archaeopteryx, the thing is that it's a fully feathered animal, and it's got flight feathers. You can tell a flight feather from a non-flight feather because it's asymmetrical. The vein doesn't go down the middle; it goes down one edge, and that's because it's acting as an airfoil. So we know it could fly. How good it could fly has long been a subject of debate. And the current view is, based on all the available data, that, as Henry Gee put it, it can fly better than a sack of potatoes. But it lacked the sternal muscles that later birds developed over the Cretaceous and into the post-Cenozoic. That enables the takeoff from a standing start thing. You know, your robin that just goes whoop into the air. Archaeopteryx couldn't do that. It was most probably a runner up onto a promontory, and whoop, once it's in the air moving, it's okay. And it can flap pretty well from that aspect. But the perfect example of a highly evolved bird would be a hummingbird. That's the kind of animal that didn't exist back in Archaeopteryx's day and required a whole bunch of additional adaptations popping along. But it is as beautifully a transitional in the sense of being a bird-like reptile. It's got teeth, it's got tail, it doesn't have, still has gastralia things, it's got all the features that are characteristic of dinosaurs, except it's a flapper. And we now know, because of Microraptor and some of these other fossils that have come along, there's one with membranes as well, that there were a lot of dinosaur lineages that were flying. And the dominant bird group that dominated the entire Mesozoic up until the KT extinction were the Enantornithines, the opposite birds that had this arm bone opposite the way the attachment that a normal bird has. And that's something that's a developmental biology issue that just is screaming for future research to work out why that originated and when. And the question is are we going to get fossils on it? It's probably no coincidence that Archaeopteryx existed in what was at the time beachfront property, that what we now think of as Europe, it's Archaeopteryx deposit, which is one of those fancy Lagerstätens. It's that produce all sorts of things would drop into it and die, and it would be preserved because there's no oxygen at the bottom. And it was a lake on an island in what was an archipelago of islands in what would eventually become Europe. So it was all beachfront property. And the fact that there are the bird there and some of the other bird fossils showing up in Spain and other places in the Cretaceous, there's a good argument to be made that birds probably are developing in an island context where you have more speciation, you have more variations going on. You've got the fact that there's a selective advantage to being able to fly. Most of the dinosaurs with feathers didn't, but some branches did with the luck of the draw. And the problem is that birds are, and the same thing goes for bats and pterosaurs, they are very lightweight, they have very hollow bones, they're not very big. Most of the early pterosaurs were very small, about the size of a small bird. Early birds were small, about the size of a crow, and the same thing for bats that were quite small. Those are really bad candidates for preservation. And so the fossil record for them is very sparse. And the origins, the chance of finding more about the origins of what's going on. We know the time frame, that it's probably relatively quick, 10, 20 million years, maybe less. The other issue has to do with the proliferation of feathers. This bears on even feathered dinosaurs. There got to be kind of a craze to depict everything with feathers. So you've had feathered tyrannosaurs and all that. We now actually have some stuff from tyrannosaurs to show that at least the parts that are preserved, nope, they didn't have feathers. So that doesn't mean their little babies didn't, or that they may not have had plumage in some parts that we don't have preservation on, but the tyrannosaurs were fully feathered. Nah, no, sorry. And probably would have been actually
dromaeosaur was well feathered.
Hmm?
Your average dromaeosaur was well feathered.
Yeah, you see, those are the smaller ones. They're man-sized or less, and there would be a logic element to it. Issue that's been popping up is how much of the feathering was sexual display rather than aerodynamic. And so it wasn't because they were turning into flyers; it's that they were preening for each other in the same way birds do. And I have the strong suspicion that was a major factor going on here. Anyway, the thing about preservation is that the more critters with feathers, the more likelihood there would be that an occasional stray feather is going to fall off and land on the beach and get preserved as an impression. And then when you get into the Mesozoic, when you've got amber in the Cretaceous period, that you can find examples of feathers showing up that way. And the more, whether they're feathered dinosaurs or just birds, the more of those around, the greater the likelihood. And the fact that feather impressions really don't start showing up until the Jurassic, late Jurassic, and then become more and more and more popular during the Cretaceous is giving us a direct measurement of how probably rare feathered critters were initially in the Jurassic. So all of this is forensic clues going on in the side issue on here. We're almost down to the end of the hour. Let's check what's going on over the live chat to see if we've missed anything in here. Apparently not.
Well, we missed Peter turning up, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Peter!
It's only Peter.
Yes, yes. Shush! Don't tell Cap. No, you're outed. You're in the room. Yeah, that whole fascinating issue of bird evolution is very, very intriguing because it is an adaptation to a whole new lifestyle, and it generates a new vertebrate class. Remember, there are only two vertebrate classes. That's the level right below the phylum level. There's kind of orders and sub things in between. But anyway, in the vertebrates, birds and mammals are the only ones that have formed in the last 250 million years. That's a long time. And we've got the reptile-mammal transition covered in great detail. I wrote that book on it. If you don't have it, please buy it. RJ needs the money, and it's damn good. And the bird aspect, which is occurring later, whereas the reptile-mammal transition is occurring in from the Permian into the Triassic period, so roughly 280 million years down to about 200 million years. And by the time that the dinosaurs are showing up in the Triassic, full-blown mammals are starting to appear, and they remain peripheral but really busy little critters all through the dinosaur period. And focusing on nocturnal environment, it's probably the reason why bats can do echolocating, is because they come from a long lineage that was really good at hearing and far more precise hearing, and they got their new, more complicated ears from the extra ear bones and stuff that we have in the mammal ear, and we can trace that development. The birds are a different bunch. And it looks like there was, as there was with mammals, where there are a lot of proto-mammals and side branches before you get to the lineages that produce the monotremes and the marsupials and placentals, branching off and becoming more and more distinct during the Cretaceous period. The same thing is going with birds, where we're finding all of these not standard birds. We've got Microraptor with 4 wings, where it's got feathers on the hind legs as well as the main wings. We got one with membrane that's almost like a bat-like thing that doesn't have feathers in this skin flap. And so there's probably lots of ones that we have never seen because they haven't been preserved. But because they're relatively small and hard to find, it's the luck of the draw. The geneticists will be peeking back more and more on this as they paleogenomic their way through the issue and work out that enanthropine issue. They went extinct then, and then the small group that, was it just luck of the draw, or were the ornithines a little better at flying, or more specialized in a niche, or just luck of the draw? They made it through the extinction. and then began to proliferate, particularly in island environments and archipelagos. There's a huge amount of proliferation. You find an awful lot of endemic island bird species, and probably the same thing was happening with Archaeopteryx at the very beginning of birds. So that's kind of a brief summary of a side subject, which is the fascinating issue of the origin of birds. Everywhere in the sciences, there are these fascinating issues that why is things the way they are now, and how do they get to be that way? And I put it to you, dear audience, that it is impossible in the year 2018 to look at either the current distribution of life on the planet or the fossil record of everything that we can see that existed previously and not see the signs of the natural branching, speciation, evolution stuff as the tracker of that. The full data field has never been accounted for by anti-evolution critics, and I will contend they never will, any more than we're going to get an eclipse book from flat earthers. So that we're just at the end of the hour here. It was nice for our brief visitor to show up there. He had to get off on other things. And Cap and Crocus Squirrel, do you have any summary on what you've heard today and what we talked of?
Cap first. That way
No.
when he hushes up, he
can't step on you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, not really. I did have one question for you earlier. I just thought about. I've forgotten. When they were talking about the radiometric dating and how it never works, did they reference the I want to say it was Andrew Snelling, where he said like, "Oh, this radiometric dating doesn't work because I used the wrong method. I used the wrong type of dating that I know would give me a wrong age."
Oh, yeah, both Snelling and Steve Austin.
Yeah.
Hovind is just a secondary redactor here. We don't have to worry about him in this area.
Hovind did actually do this, and I'll tell you about it after Cap shuts up.
Oh, wow. Yeah, if you got a reference on that too, shoot it my way, because I'll want to check into that.
Yeah, I was just meaning when they were talking about the radiometric dating and the contested bones, so they referenced that to show why it doesn't work. I was just curious on that.
Yeah, well, Steve Austin did a thing where he was going to try to disprove isochrons, and he did it by cheating, which is he took samples that were not contiguous, which is exactly the opposite of what you get. And so he created a fake isochron to show that isochrons were just an artifact. Well, if you cheat, this is like trying to prove that CSI forensics is a lie because you can create a false crime scene room in your den. No, that doesn't work that way.
Okay.
Snelling is in a different category. Snelling is remarkably agile at stepping around relevant data points, and I'll be calling attention to this in the new book. I've mentioned it before. Snelling on diamonds. For those of you who don't know, that there's a small subculture of the creationist argument that to say that diamonds have been dated and have shown that they are much younger than the billions of years that evolution science claims. And it turns out, yeah, you can get a little bit of a reading off of a diamond, but there's a reason why you can get a reading off of the diamond is because sometimes the reader can just misread something. It can bounce off a carbon-13 atom. Sometimes, once you take the diamond out of the ground, cosmic rays can scatter through them. And once in a while, a cosmic ray can actually convert one of the things into a carbon-14. And there are nitrogen contaminants and other stuff inside of diamonds that occur naturally. Also, the hum of the equipment you're using builds up a radioactivity on its own. It'll give a false reading even when there's nothing there. They have to take that into account and have to eventually re-gear the equipment. And so there's a bunch of different techniques that can generate. But what you will generate from that is somebody's got a feedback, is a really tiny amount of carbon-14 reading. And if you plug it into the formulas, you're going to find that it dates, bing, bing, to 80 to 90,000 years ago. And that's way off the scale. And when you looked at Snelling's treatment of this, there was a paper by, I think, Taylor and Salvon from the 1990s or somewhere in there that I wrote, by the way, to the author to get the original text of it. And he sent it to me, and I cross-checked everything. Oh, yes. Hello, Cyrus. We will be having many chats in due course once the show stops. The radiometric dating thing he was doing, it was patently obvious that Snelling was suppressing all of those buts in the discussion, in the paper. And then Mike Riddle, the creationist, went along and copied the Snelling argument. And I have asked him in 2010, Riddle, and again when he was with Jackson Weed and I on his show, again in 2018, did you ever read that paper? And nope, he's never read the paper. And so the lack of curiosity and follow through on this is just gobsmacking. Well, we're past the hour, and I'll thank you all for. I hope it was a good show. I hope you enjoyed.
I actually had comments. I was waiting for Cap to show.
Oh yes, oh yes, yes. Put in your comment here before.
Yeah,
sorry.
I know it's really easy to forget me when I want to, like when I want to drop when I'm dropping mute Cap in the side chat there.
Oh, I try to forget you as much as possible, Croc.
Well, of course. Okay, first off, as a reference, I was watching one of Kent's videos when he made the claim that he had taken a bunch of old rock and sent it to various labs to be carbon dated. And of course, they got no carbon because, well, there was goddamn carbon.
And see on that, because it sounds very much like Kent to do that. And also would imply that he was shelling out money to do that, because actually you have to pay to have a radiocarbon dating done, so that would require a certain amount of scratch. But anyway, if you can track down when that happened, I'd love to know more.
I only have this from Kent's own pie hole, so he could be again telling stories.
Oh yeah, that's not impossible. I will not
demand that he did do this. Is that he said himself that he had done such a thing. Snelling has definitely done that sort of shit. There are a few others that have done that kind of shit, and at this point, the various labs are starting to ask for, they demand to know where you got a piece of rock before they'll test it.
Yeah, that was
before they would bother even sending you the mailer for the samples.
Yeah, Snelling is rather notorious in the community for trying to pull little fast ones, because they want to slip in a way to show that there's some sort of problem here. But if they don't deal with the provenance,
it would really help if Snelling wasn't a freaking traitor. Seriously, well, this guy is well trained. He knows better than this, but the money is so much better at AIG and ICR that he's emasculated himself.
Well, that may be an additional lubricant, but he's a Tortugan, remember. He has an object of desire. He definitely wants the Earth to be young, and he doesn't think about the parts that he doesn't think about. There is a certain degree of cravenness to him on the matter of the multiple floods, and I still haven't tracked down all of the forensics as to when he did his little flip-flop. But for a while there, he knows that there's volcanic ash in the fossil record. There's tons of it. And in order for that to happen in the flood, the spigot has to turn off. You can't have airborne volcanic ash coming from volcanoes that are underwater. So he realized that there had to be more than one flood. And that didn't fit the dogma.
Well,
so he backpedaled on that.
There's another stuff that Mr. Snelling pulled a little while back. He was making claims of rocks that had been dated to thousands or millions of years old, but he then showed us where he had gotten these rocks, and made the claim that radiometric dating cannot be right, because he got all of the samples he had picked up came from the base of Mount St. Helens. They can't be more than about 38 years old because, well, reasons.
Well, it depends on what's in them, because after all, magma has stuff in it, and the stuff didn't materialize yesterday.
But he was talking. But again, once a rock has been melted, the clock resets. We know that.
Yeah, and would generate a recent isochron. So,
but at the same time, he's trying to pull this data out of an open system. You don't do that.
No, well, but Snelling will do that because he's trying to document the thing he wants to be true. He also relies an awful lot on very old stuff. I've noticed that to be, even though he does occasionally reference newer material, I was thunderstruck by one area where he was talking about gravel in this spot down in New Zealand where he's from. And obviously this impressed him enormously at the time. And he still alludes to it in even interviews in videos that he's done. I think I did a little blurb on it in one of the previous Evolution Hours. And the thing that was fascinating about it is that when you research that deposit, you discover it was a tidal estuary, that there's a huge technical literature. Those gravel forms are very characteristic of a wash in, wash out over long periods of time. There's nothing mysterious about it. And somehow he manages to avoid all of that technical work in his discussion of it. Curious, isn't it? Well, anyway, now was that the last of your comments there, now that I'm about to step on you?
No, carry on smartly.
Yeah, there we go. So I think we covered an awful lot here. I hope those interested in these things will follow up on the sources. There was actually other stuff I had encountered on some of the goofball material that Moore had done, but they weren't open access papers. I was able to acquire full text, but not in a way that anybody else can follow up on the linkages on because of the sources that I had. So I always make it a point always to put full text links to, so everybody can see the whole shebang and they can research on their own, and I hope they do. One thing, I never want anybody to take my word for it. You may find that I'm damned reliable, but you will have discovered that because you'll have checked me out and you'll have looked up the sources and you'll go, yeah, that's pretty good on that. And so don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. Don't take Kent Hovind's word for it, or Harwin
Don't do that.
Or any of those. And build up a
repertoire. It is possible you can catch RJ being wrong. It has happened.
I can be wrong. In fact, there was one case, and when I get around, if I ever live long enough to revise because the Bible tells me so, cherubim, one of the notes about Bertrand Russell, that I misjudged Russell. And I had done that because I had relied on a single scholarly work, and at the time didn't know the controversy around it. I had misjudged it because the guy had done previously perfectly fine work, and I hadn't realized there had been dust settling years since then. But a Russell scholar caught me on it and reminded me of it, and I went back and looked at my notes on it, and I go, yeah, actually, that's all from Monk's book. Okay, yeah. So, and I called attention in Planet of the Apes chapter about the goof I had made on the tooth eruption pattern on Australopithecines that I had been caught on. Harwin Yahya is in jail. Did you know? I knew he had been hauled in on something. If they actually put him in the slammer. Thank you, Brian, for tartukanwordpress.com. I have the link up in the description to the video, too, so it's already up there. I put the direct link up to Evolution Slam Dunk, and I also put the direct link up to GoFundMe. I'd love if I had even a fraction of the crowd support that stupid Kent Hovind or flat earthers do, but we haven't reached that stage yet. Anyway, I'm rattling on again. Thank you all for watching the show. We are ending the broadcast and only 11 minutes late. This would be about the time that SciStrike would be starting his show. So bye.